Hello there and welcome to a DF Direct special. We are at GTC at San Jose in America, and we have just seen DLSS 5, and I think it's fair to say that it's one of the most surprising, potentially disruptive, transformative, next generation technologies we've seen. Essentially, machine learning is being brought to lighting, the attempt being to bring photorealism to the games of today and indeed tomorrow. Oliver Mackenzie, you're joining me. You saw the demo as well.
Yes, Rich, I think this is probably the most impressive by quite a lot game demo I've seen in my time at Digital Foundry, so I think it's definitely worth discussing here today. It's a very special technology showcase, I would say.
Yeah, I think we should kick off with what is DLSS 5. Well, how do you describe it, Oliver? I mean, it is basically an attempt to, well, traditionally you would see like an increase in hardware technology performance that would enable new lighting techniques. But I think what NVIDIA are essentially trying to do is kind of like bypass all of that, taking us like a generation or two beyond lighting as it's seen today, and it's done entirely through machine learning with a new form of DLSS that is complementary to the existing ones, frame generation and super resolution. So yeah, it's basically like a new string to the bow of DLSS. But I think our first point of contact was this particular image of Resident Evil Requiem, where we saw this sequence here. So that's the original past-facing version that you're seeing there, and then kind of like the DLSS 5 take on it. Oliver, what do you think of this? Because this is like quite extraordinary. We honestly, when we saw this for the first time, we didn't know actually what DLSS 5 was.
Yeah, this just blew me away. So basically you have Grace there in this scene. This is kind of a very famous scene from the beginning of the game.
Yeah.
And obviously the path traced render has a great lighting detail, but then they swap over to DLSS 5. The first thing that I think sticks out to anyone here is the fidelity and realism in Grace's face. And it's almost like we've integrated a grab bag of graphical techniques here in one fell swoop. Grace's skin has a much more convincing specular response with quickly diffused specular highlights. Her hair is lit more realistically as strands closer to her scalp are occluded more heavily. Her eyes now have perfect specular highlights, and they appear much more realistic and lifelike, I would say. And when you're looking at things like the specular response in her jacket, those things are much more true to life as well. I would say the lighting in the background is also considerably enhanced, especially when you look at elements like this lamp post here. Where in the DLSS 5 view, it looks much more convincingly reflective, like a real lamp post would behave in wet weather conditions. I think the kind of apparent aesthetic changes to Grace's face here will perhaps be most controversial, but throughout the other demos that we saw and the other shots that we saw in these games, I wasn't seeing nearly as much of a difference in terms of that DLSS 5 view of the character relative to a ray traced or path traced view of the same character.
Yeah, I think the important thing to point out, though, is that it's not actually replacing assets as such. So geometry, I think that's quite remarkable because the geometry looks different on that Grace shot, but it's not. It's the same geometry. It's the same texture assets. It's simply going through a different form of lighting that, from NVIDIA's perspective, is kind of like next generation and transformative. And when you first see that shot, it's quite difficult to argue with that. I mean, when you flick between the two, which one would you rather play? It's a bit of a no-brainer, isn't it? What's quite interesting about this is NVIDIA's stated intention for the technology. They're kind of like looking at this as almost kind of like trying to anticipate the original fully realized vision of the game developers here. This demo is actually quite interesting in terms of its technical makeup, in that it's using an RTX 5090 to run the past-face version of Resident Evil, but there's a second 5090 that's actually doing the DLSS 5 pass there. But the intention is, this is a very early demo. They keep calling it like a snapshot of current development for the model. Right. Yeah. So they're expecting changes, they're expecting improvements, but crucially, they're expecting to be able to do this on one GPU. In fact, they are doing it on one GPU in their labs right now, but in terms of getting like full speed performance for the demo, they wanted to actually run it on a second one, but they're looking to continually optimize.
Yeah, and they did say that they do have it running, like you said, on one GPU, and they basically made it clear that the VRAM requirements at this stage aren't so steep. Right. They couldn't run on a single consumer GeForce GPU, so presumably like a 5090 GPU. Right. They were running in this demo with two 5090s, but that's obviously not the intent. They want to ship it, they intend to ship it on single GPU systems when this launches in fall of 2026.
Yeah, which isn't so far away.
No, it's not so far away.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what to say. I mean, I think maybe if we look at some of the other demos here, I think Starfield is a really interesting one because the base imagery, of course, is not ray-traced, not path-traced. And yet we're still seeing transformative changes here, particularly in terms of character rendering, which is an area where Starfield received quite a lot of criticism. But again, the effect is quite remarkable here, isn't it?
Yeah, and I found this very interesting. So we saw this through a variety of games that basically they really do intend for that base render that's going into this, the base color, the base motion vectors, the base render to be as high quality as possible. Starfield obviously has some issues with its lighting. It's not ray traced, it tends to look very flat. And I thought DLSS 5 did a fantastic job enhancing details and enhancing that lighting presentation in a way that I didn't really think was possible, because all of a sudden you've got this game that otherwise looks very flat, otherwise has a kind of last generation appearance in some respects. And all of a sudden it kind of looks like a path traced game. But there are still some issues though, like you can note screen space errors in certain games where like you have screen space reflections or screen space ambient occlusion, and those things are breaking up in the DLSS 5 image. So it's not like it's perfectly understanding and reconstructing all characteristics of light. It's still depending on the base render, but it's super impressive to see a game like Starfield, to see this character's jacket, for instance, all the specular highlights cast in a much more realistic light, the material properties along her clothing there, and indeed in her face, this colossal increase in lighting fidelity, where all of a sudden you're seeing proper subsurface scattering, her eyes are properly self-shadowing in there, and her mouth is also shadowing her teeth correctly, and all these other characteristics that they pointed out to us that you don't really think about in the context of real-time rendering, because you're so used to a lower quality image than what, you know, high-end CG could provide. But all of a sudden, we're kind of in the realm of high-end CG with this technology.
Absolutely, yeah. There are plenty of demos that we saw. We're going to be producing a much longer video where we can talk in depth about them. Let's talk about Oblivion Remastered. It's quite an interesting showcase of what happens when you introduce DLSS 5 to an Unreal Engine 5 title. Software Lumen now is like radically transformed into something quite different. Character rendering, again, gets a gigantic revamp, I'd say.
Yeah.
And
you've never seen elves look this realistic. It's crazy.
That's the bottom line, yeah. Also, it's really interesting to see the kind of, you know, the occlusion that's happening on all of the brickwork, on all of the sort of castle-like structures there. It really is quite extraordinary to see it in motion and to sort of flip between the two there. You know, windows that look completely flat and opaque now actually seem to look properly correct. Yeah, it's just quite extraordinary.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because the old lighting in the game I thought generally looked quite handsome. Like, I'm not opposed to Lumen, and obviously Lumen takes some shortcuts, but here you're really just seeing all that kind of very coarse lighting detail brought out to like a really granular level, where you get really tight shadows all of a sudden underneath awnings, where the light is spilling out over the scene in a much more realistic manner, where you're getting those contact shadows, and it's just a markedly improved presentation. Even they pointed out like some of the character models in the game are a little bit on the simpler side, but they still look a lot better when we put DLSS 5 on. I mean, they look a little bit uncanny, I would say, but definitely the overall portrayal of those characters is much more sophisticated.
Yeah. And we also took a quick look at Assassin's Creed Shadows here, which is quite remarkable in how it's handling environmental lighting and shadow there. It's, you know, it's radically transformed.
Yeah, I would definitely say so. Obviously, Assassin's Creed Shadows is a game that is a very handsome title, I would say. In general, it was obviously part of our Graphics of the Year list last year. But when we look at that base render, we see there are some issues with like shadow maps, and maybe the detailing in the foliage lighting is not quite as granular as you'd like. You move over to DLSS 5 and all those issues are basically fixed. Like, all of a sudden the game looks like it has ray traced shadows, when in fact, of course, we know that it does not. And like the fog is integrated much more nicely into the scene. The overall lighting presentation is just dramatically improved to the point where if you were squinting, or even not really squinting, you could mistake this for an image of a real-life forest, I'd have to say.
Yeah, they are attempting to bring photorealism to games with this, which I think is quite interesting, but also quite controversial as well, because this is basically today's game engines viewed through the lens of NVIDIA's AI model. And I think it's fair to say that there's going to be a lot of discussion about whether this is the right direction.
Yeah.
A lot of discussion about whether this is actually what the the kind of ultimate intent of the developer actually is.
Yeah.
And I also think, we were told that the way the technology works is it actually integrates into NVIDIA Streamline.
Right.
So although developers can actually tune DLSS 5 lighting seemingly to be what they want it to be, there's going to be a lot of DLSS 5 mods happening to a lot of games, whether the developers like it or not, I think.
Yeah, I'd have to imagine that someone is going to get this in Optiscaler, and
Yes.
it's going to be a bit of a wild ride. But yeah, I mean, they even discussed, I spoke with one of the engineers in this project, and he mentioned that you could apply it to games as primitive as Minecraft and get like a Minecraft RTX style appearance. So this does not just apply to AAA games. It does not just apply to high-end graphics. We're already seeing that a little bit with Starfield, which is a more primitive title.
Yeah.
But it really could apply to just about any game that can supply color and motion vectors, I guess.
Yeah.
And obviously that's going to be a matter of controversy. We've already heard that some developers are on board with the technique, that they really like it. They think it enhances their games, brings them up to the visual fidelity that they had imagined in their heads but could not deliver. But obviously this is going to be a work in progress. And they'd also say that perhaps there could be some additional, they mentioned some tuning that might be involved, some exclusions that might be involved in this model in order to get it to a level where developers are comfortable shipping it in their games.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it is still work in progress, although we are expecting this to be delivered this year, which I still think is like quite a remarkable proposition.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of work still to do on this. The concept that they're using two 5090s effectively to bring this demo to us today and somehow rationalizing that down to one, that's going to be quite an interesting experience, I think.
Yeah, just one 5090 is ambitious enough, but then you got to think about the rest of NVIDIA's stack and the 5070s, the 5070s, 5080s. Could those cards run this? Again, that's kind of an open question at the moment. I think it's probably their intent that those cards could run a version of this. And we did hear as well that this should scale. I mean, if the VRAM question can be settled, this should scale reasonably well with output resolution is what we heard. Yeah. So potentially like this at 4K with two 5090s, maybe it goes down to one 5090, hopefully of 4K for many games. And then perhaps the other cards are capable of it at 1440p or 1080p.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it is a separate component to frame generation and DLSS super resolution. So you kind of like still choose your settings, so to speak. Mm-hmm. I think it's also going to be quite interesting to see how the presentation changes according to the input settings that you choose from the quality menus and whatnot. What does DLSS 5's take on ray tracing look like versus path tracing or without ray tracing at all? That's going to be quite interesting as well. But there's just so many questions. I think we're still struggling to kind of process all of this.
It's such a leap in computer graphics. I mean, it's almost getting beyond computer graphics and into neural rendering. You are supplying a game image, you are supplying imagery from a game engine. Granted, it's sophisticated imagery from a game engine, but then you're getting this greatly enhanced lighting presentation just because this model understands lighting, understands how materials interact, understands how things should behave in the real world, kind of almost better than you could program into a game engine, at least to some degree. That might be a controversial statement, but I think it's definitely true. And it's just an absolutely incredible accomplishment. I cannot wait to see it. And this was running like, it was running at reasonable performance levels. Granted, maybe there were some performance hitches here or there in certain games. We're not sure where that might have been coming from. But in general, like this was very performant, very real time. Rich had his hand in the controller, was manipulating these scenes. Like this is real gameplay you're seeing here, where Rich was really manipulating. This was not a canned demo.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really important because we've seen demos in the past that have been potentially transformative. The classic case being The Matrix Awakens, right, where you saw that and you thought, wow, this is the future of games. But fundamentally, it was a demo. It wasn't a game. But this is existing shipping titles running with this technology as like an extra layer on top. And man, I can't wait to see more. But I think the fact is that we saw plenty already, which is surprising. And there does seem to be developer buy-in on it as well. NVIDIA was saying that Todd Howard personally signed off on this.
Yeah.
This is the way he kind of wanted his game to be seen, was the sort of paraphrased version of that.
Yeah.
It's the way I'd certainly prefer to play Starfield.
I would definitely agree here. But yeah, that question of artistic intent, I think it's going to be one that people are talking about for a long time with this technology. But I certainly can see the improvement in fidelity, if nothing else. the massive improvement in fidelity, especially for games that are more realistic. I'd be very curious to see this interact with a game like Hi-Fi Rush or something.
Right, yeah, what's
where
gonna
like that's
happen
a very deliberate style, obviously. Would this do anything that you'd want in an image like that, or would it be counterintuitive? Would it be counterproductive to that game's cell shaded visual style? Would it actually produce an interesting result? Obviously, with Minecraft, that's something you can kind of get away with, but perhaps there are games where it would be less appropriate, and presumably developers would be not enabling it for those titles.
Yeah, plenty of questions still remain, but the impact of this technology, I don't think I've seen a demo quite as astonishing as this for quite some time. But I think that's all we've got to say about this right now, because we want to do a much bigger video based on everything we saw. We spent several hours looking at these demos and talking with the actual people who created the technology, which was a bit of a thrill for me.
Yeah, it was really exciting.
So yeah, look forward to more from Digital Foundry, but that's all from us on this one. Like, subscribe, share if you enjoy the content, ring the bell for instant notifications, but please do consider checking out the DF supporter program, patreon.com/Digital Foundry. That's all from us on this one though. More coming soon. Thanks for watching and supporting Digital Foundry.